All right, all right. Oh, all right. Yeah, okay. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to day 2, 3 of Coalesce. Everyone caffeinated, feeling good, ready to fight today? Well, hello, everyone, and hello to our remote attendees. We see you. My name is Erica Louie. I am the head of data at DBT Labs, and I am very excited to introduce this session that I'm sure you're all waiting with anticipation, so I'll be fast. So this session is called Money, Python, and the Holy Grail, Designing Operational Data Models. Okay, well, we will be joined by the infamous Benn Stancil. He is the co-founder and chief analytics officer at Mode Analytics, which is a BI platform. He is also known as the Friday Fight Guy, benn.substack.com, where he talks about tech culture, data, and everything in between. Check it out, subscribe, it's every Friday. All right, so some logistics first. All Q&A is going to be in DBT Slack. It's going to be Coalesce, Money, Python. If you're not part of the DBT community on Slack, what are you doing? Sign up right now and join in on fun. We won't be doing any live Q&A this session. Instead, Ben is going to probably stick around for like an hour or two to answer any of your questions. So, non-remote attendees, we are on a 30-second ahead of schedule from our remote counterparts, so do not spoil anything. All right, Ben, are you ready?
Yeah.
All right.
All right, does this work? Cool. Okay. All right. So I'm Ben. As Erica said, I work for Mode. Mode is a modern BI tool designed for data teams. As a short plug, we released an integration with the DBT semantic layer yesterday. If you want to check it out, you can go here and learn more. But I'm not going to talk about that. Instead, I'm going to talk about money, Python, and the Holy Grail. So let's talk about money. So when it comes to money and like data teams, there's this kind of open secret that's sort of ironic that like data teams measure a bunch of stuff, but one thing they can't measure is themselves. That if you look at like job descriptions of data scientists, you get a bunch of stuff like this that says, hey, this is Airbnb. We assist in defining how to best measure the performance of Airbnb's business through metrics and definitions. You get it from Stripe, same thing, create metrics and dashboards to measure the business. From Lyft, establish metrics that measure our health of our products. Airtable, same thing. You could like do this forever. You could do this 387,000 times. But despite all this and all of this, like this is how we want to basically act as data scientists and analysts and measuring things. When we talk about measuring ourselves as a data team, we say a lot of things like this. So this is from Tristan from the Analytics Engineering Roundup. We get kind of like hand-wavy about this, and we don't really say how exactly we're going to do it. It's kind of like, it's valuable because of something. So what ends up happening is we end up telling a lot of indirect stories. This is from Barry at Hex, basically saying, hey, like, don't actually measure ROI directly. Measure it through the impact that other teams tell you that you have. And so, okay, so this is how we kind of approach like measuring things or measuring ourselves as data teams. And what ends up happening is a dynamic that Sean Taylor called out, which is actually just takes a lot of faith to build a data team. That when you hire data teams, you end up kind of doing it like sight unseen because you don't actually know what they're going to deliver until you have them. And so we're not actually sure how to measure that. And so you end up in this case where, like, again, it's kind of a matter of faith to actually hire data teams. Now, all that can be fine when the economy looks like this. When companies aren't like worried about spending money and all that, it's all like great. When the economy looks like this, which it has for the last 9 months, and you got a bunch of headlines that look like this, and like it's doom time and tech, and some other kind of depressing things, then people start asking like, what exactly is it that you do here? And like that's a point where we need to actually be able to talk about money a lot more directly. We need to be able to say what it is that we're doing. That we are going to have a boss or a CEO, or one of us will be the CEO, and we'll start asking this question of like, why am I paying these people to do what they do? And so we're going to need to have a good answer for that. And so to talk about that, I want to talk about Python. So historically, when we get this question of like, what is the thing that you as a data team do that's really valuable? Like, what are you actually doing that makes it worth the cost of what we're paying you to do it? The answers we give are kind of like this. So one of those answers is this pyramid. This is a pyramid from Monica Rigatti. That's kind of this like hierarchy of needs for data science teams. It starts with some basic stuff at the bottom, like logging and ETL and data cleaning, and then like you get the metrics. But the very top of this thing is like this AI, experimentation, ML, stuff like that. It's this like hard technical stuff. And so like this is the kind of the implication of this is we as data teams are supposed to be climbing this pyramid, presumably because the stuff at the top is more valuable than the stuff at the bottom. And so ultimately, like when we want to say what is it we do is valuable, it's this stuff at the top. And so to use like a really crude and kind of awful shorthand for this, for the sake of a punny talk title, it's like Python stuff. And so this is one answer we give, is we're going to do like this complicated stuff that's going to be like AI and experimentation. The second answer we often give is like, why are we here? What do we get paid to do? Is stuff like this. So this is from McKinsey. I don't know, it's a succinct quote. I know it's McKinsey. The fundamental job of a data team is to help people make decisions. And so we are here to like collect and analyze, or the reason we collect, analyze, and deploy data is to help people make decisions. And if you like prefer your kind of corporate overlords to be Silicon Valley types, Sequoia basically said the same thing, where the point of this is like strategic decision making, that we as data teams are here to help leadership like decide big things. And so this is a pretty common answer too for data teams, is like drive these kinds of decisions, do kind of in-depth analysis, do in-depth research, stuff like that. And so we are like at our most valuable when we're answering questions like this, like do we build product A or B? Do we expand internationally? Do we hire more salespeople, close down a product line, spend more on ads, host a conference? Market to a new audience, sell the company. Like these are all these big strategic decisions that we as data teams can try to help companies make. And so like this is why you pay us, to be your consultant to help you decide these things. I like this work. This is compelling work. This is an answer that I want to give. But like it's not like that compelling as a reason to say go out and spend a bunch of money on a data team, in part because a lot of CEOs kind of have this attitude. A lot of the people that are making decisions like, yes, data is useful, but there's kind of this thing where like they're going to ultimately make some decisions based on their gut. If we really want to hang our hat on like why we're valuable, we have to deal with this kind of idea that ultimately, you know, like Jeff Bezos is going to do what Jeff Bezos wants to do. So the final answer then what we often give when we're saying, hey, like what is valuable about data teams, and this has kind of become more popular recently, is this idea of like data activation or operational analytics or whatever we're calling it now. It's a bit of a vague term, but like generally the idea here is we can push data out to other teams. We can like take data from where it is and push it out to other places. And so to use like the definitions of the companies that think about this sort of thing, Census described this as operational analytics is an approach centered on building shared understanding between teams based on trusted, highly accessible data from your warehouse. And in the sake of like the fairness doctrine, high touch, kind of said more or less the same thing. So basically it's about like getting data out of the warehouse into the software where people are making decisions. Which, okay, so that like sounds great. I agree that that is valuable. But there's this kind of big open question in the middle of like, well, what are we doing to actually make it impactful? Great, we get data to other places, but like, to do what? To achieve what ends? How do we actually get there? Like, there's this kind of middle step where we've got like, activate data, profit. I don't really know how we go about activating it. Like, what does that actually mean? The answer we typically get is the point of it is to make more customized marketing campaigns, to make things like customer success more proactive, which is good. But again, if we're trying to justify like the existence of an entire data team, that's sort of an underwhelming, like, meh answer. So that kind of leaves us in a bit of a dilemma, where when we get asked this question of like, what exactly do we do here, none of these answers are actually that compelling. That I think they're useful, they're great, like experimentation is useful, data activation is useful, strategic analysis is useful, AI, I am told, is useful. But like, they're not things that are indispensable. They're not things that like when push comes to shove and we got to convince like a CEO why we should be sticking around, why we should pay all this money for the tools and the teams that we have. Like, why are we here? None of these things really quite hold up. So what is it? What is a better answer? And to do that, I want to talk about the Holy Grail. So a lot of those things on the other slide are like this kind of very blinged out, fancy Holy Grail. They are lots of nice technologies. They sound impressive. They are at this like long line of a long maturity curve. It takes a long time for us to get there. We build something fancy, sounds great, that's what we want. Like this Nazi will tell you, that ain't the Holy Grail. The Holy Grail is something much more simple. The Holy Grail is this thing. It's a cup for a carpenter. Shout out Indiana Jones, fuck the Nazis. And specifically to me, so like, what does this mean? The holy grail to me for companies is these simple models of the business. It's operational models of the business. And so before getting into specifically what I mean by that, I can tell a little bit of history about myself. So prior to all of this tech stuff, I worked in DC, and this job, it's at a think tank. It's a mouthful of things. My job here, so this was in 2009 to 2012. This was shortly after the 2008 financial crisis. And so my job there was to write a weekly newsletter about what was going on in the economy. So like my job, I guess, is to heckle the internet about things I'm not qualified to do that about. I spent a lot of time in this job basically like reading things that were happening in the economy, trying to figure out like what is it that we talk about when we talk about the tantalizing headline of living the downside scenario in 2012. And to do this, I spent a lot of time reading like sort of pseudo-academic economic publications. So if you've ever had the pleasure of going here, this is where I spent a lot of time. This is the working paper page of the IMF. It's a fascinating place. So I spent a lot of time on this. And in the midst of all of this, and trying to like understand what's actually going on, you read a lot of stuff like this. This was not what was useful. The thing that was useful was actually mostly from one person, which is Paul Krugman. So Paul Krugman, people may know, is like kind of a political pundit now. He writes the New York Times. He's kind of like polarizing in a lot of ways. But his original claim to fame was he won the Nobel Prize in economics. He won it for like stuff on international trade. And so in 2008, he also wrote a lot of stuff about the economy. Unlike ours, it got read. But he was doing a lot of stuff that was saying, hey, this is like how we should think about what's going on, the types of policies that we should have, those kinds of things. And so to him, his approach was, in 2008, 2009, 2010, the economy was kind of upside down. And the easiest thing to do was actually go back to kind of Econ 101. It was go back to the very basics and try to figure out what's going on like basic econ models. It wasn't stuff like this. Like none of what he published was this stuff. What he published was this. It was like blog posts with charts that are like, this is something you'll learn in like your first econ class. Or it would be stuff like this. It was like these very basic models of this is how an economy works. And so his view of this was to understand what's like happening. To understand the economy, you have to understand how it functions. It's not a matter of just looking at a bunch of numbers. It's a matter of understanding how those numbers are actually related to one another. And so it's not enough, say, to look at tables like this. These are like economic indicators. You need to know how these things are actually related to one another. You need to know like why one number, if that one moves, you would expect the other one to move in a particular way. And so like in one very kind of particular telling example, in 2008, 2009, the Fed like dramatically lowered interest rates. That's this cliff that it drove off here. The thing you would typically expect here is like when interest rates go down, inflation goes up, okay? Or in today's world, when interest rates go up, inflation goes down. And so a lot of people, because of this, were predicting runaway inflation. This was an op-ed in the Wall Street Journal basically saying like, oh my God, we're gonna have runaway inflation because the interest rates were so low. And so like according to the metric that you're looking at, according to that last graph, that's what you expect. Like that's the right, this is down, this should go up. But Krugman's basic models, and this was the extent of his basic model, it's like this sort of very simple thing, was basically saying actually there wouldn't be inflation. That because of the context in which this was happening, because if you understand the way the economy works, then the conditions actually weren't right for inflation. It was despite interest rates being low. And so it was like kind of a rejection of what you would read from the metrics by understanding kind of the way these things are actually working together. And ultimately, he was right. This is inflation after the recession. The gray bar is the recession. It was kind of stayed flat after that. After this, obviously, like in 2020, it goes way up. But you know, like, let the good times roll. And so this was all able to figure that out because he had this kind of basic understanding of how economies work. And so again, you can't understand this through KPIs. You need to know the mechanics of what's actually happening. You need to know like how is it that inflation or that interest rates lead to inflation. It's like you have low interest rates, X happens, Y happens, Z happens. You should have inflation. Like what is those actual mechanics that get you there? And once you have that, you can understand if those mechanics are actually in place. And so that's how you should make policy decisions, not based on just like KPIs and metrics. And so like, okay, as the kind of obvious punchline to all of this, this to me is what I think like data teams should be doing. That we should be thinking about how do we model our businesses in the same way that Paul Krugman was modeling the economy. That how do we build these operational models that describe the basic functions of how things are happening inside of a business instead of just looking at KPIs and metrics. So specifically what I mean by that is like, what is an operational model? It is a simplified representation of a business that describes these kind of mathematical relationships between like key characteristics of the business. It is not, despite having the word operational and model in it, it is not a machine learning model. It has nothing to do with that. It is not a DBT model. It has nothing to do with that. It's not the input to operational applications, like a DBT model that feeds into a reverse ETL tool, despite potentially it sounding like that. And it's not also a semantic or relational model. This isn't the way that like data is connected together in your warehouse. It's not like table A joins to table B on these join keys. It's like the layer above that. It's how do these metrics actually relate to each other in the real world? How is it that, like, again, inflation is related to interest rates, not in the way that like the Fed joins that data together, but how do you actually think about those things affecting one another and the way they're actually impacting each other in the real world? And to show you what I mean by that, I want to steal a couple of examples from Josh Wills. This is Josh Wills. He gave a talk a few years ago called How to Play Well with Others, so I'm going to steal from that. And so he described some operational models that like key businesses use, like big businesses use. And one he described was Google. And so Google's is actually pretty simple. Y'all could probably figure this out. But like, there's a very simple equation that defines how Google's business actually functions. Like, if you want to describe Google's business, you can do this in a pretty simple step. You first have the number of people who are searching for stuff on Google times the searches per person times how much money Google makes per search based on the ads they click and things like that, and you get revenue. And like, Google's entire business can be described by this, or Google's search business. There's a lot of other things now that Google does, but putting that aside. Like, it's a very complicated business. Like, if you look at search kind of in the abstract, you think, like, this is pretty hard. How do I figure out how to measure this? But if you break it down this way, it gets like very simple. Like, it's just these 3 steps. That's all it is. It's like as simple as Paul Krugman's kind of simple diagrams. And so there's a couple things here that you get if you do this that are really, really powerful. One is that if revenue goes up or down, it has to come from one of these things. Like, if this number on the end changes that you care about, you're like, OK, I know I have to go through these 3 things and figure that out. And one of these will have moved. And so you know how to identify problems or opportunities and say, hey, like, we can move that. The other thing that you can do is these things are like decomposable. Like, these things are separate. And so you can actually have different teams focused on each. You can say, hey, we have a team that is focused on just getting more people to search on Google. And we have a team that's focused on more searches per person. And a team that's focused on ads of how we convert those people to paying more money. And so not only does this make like business problems easier to understand, it also helps you break them down and find opportunities and help them grow by just having this very simple kind of equation for what Google actually looks like. And so like other businesses, you can apply this basically the same idea to other businesses. So if you have Facebook, you can do the exact same thing with Facebook. Facebook has growth, the number of like active users on Facebook on any given day. It's got engagement, how much time they spend on Facebook on any given day. And it's got like ad efficiency, which is how much money do we make per minute they're spending on Facebook. And again, that equals revenue. Like, this is Facebook's entire business can be captured in this very simple equation. And you can do the same thing here again. You can have, and Facebook actually does this, where they have a growth team, they have an engagement team, and they have an ads team, that they are just focused on these particular metrics. And so you can break down this problem. Like, it's a very clear way to understand what Facebook's trying to do. These consumer examples are kind of simple. You can also do it, though, with like SaaS businesses. So for Slack is a B2B SaaS business, charges by the number of people who use it. So it's like a seat-based model. For them, Slack has something that looks like this. It's like the number of signups times the user retention rate, so how many of those signups stick around, times the conversion rate of how many people actually convert to a paid plan, equals revenue. Now, you could do this in different ways. There's different sort of slight tweaks you can make to this, where it could be something about like the engagement rate and the conversion rate at different engagement rates and stuff like that. But the point is, you can make these fairly simple equations that describe exactly how this business functions. You can also do it with things that are even a little more complicated. So like take Snowflake. Snowflake's a little bit more complicated because it doesn't sell seats. It sells to like customers and companies. So their business would look more like this. They've got the number of new leads of like new accounts that come in, the conversion rate of those accounts, times the contract size of those accounts, times like the expansion rate of how much of those could grow. That's revenue. And so all of these things, again, you can break these businesses down in really simple ways. And so when you have problems trying to figure it out, rather than thinking about these things in sort of abstract like views of metrics and dashboards, you can actually think about them in terms of like, how does the business work? How does the business function? How do these things relate to one another? And it makes it a way easier way to actually address these problems. So the other thing, too, that these models let you do is you can actually sort of have second and third order models that come off of each of these steps. So for this new leads thing, there's actually a model underneath this. There's like a marketing funnel model that moves from basically people going to the website to like engaging with your marketing content to converting ultimately to leads that you could actually put underneath that. So that new leads doesn't have to be just one number. You can add complexity to that and sort of build out more models there. Which, speaking of leads, as an aside, we are hosting a thing at Acme tonight. If you want oysters, if you want to experience like a lead operational model up close, come eat some stuff. Okay, so in addition to like leads as a secondary model, there's also things in like the conversion rate, like there are sales cycles in that. There's all these other models that actually are driving each of these individual boxes that you can, again, define these simple equations to actually describe how they work. And there's other models in the business. So like underlying all of this, there is a business that you have to build. There's things like recruiting pipelines that you can model these in the same way as well. And so you can actually start to define a company based on this like one very big model of like, you know, the sort of Google or Facebook thing, and then figure out from each of those pieces different ways to continue to break it down into ways that actually describe, like, this is how your business functions. This is the way that it actually works. And so, like, what do you get if you do that? Like, what do you get out of the other end? And I think the best way to do this is actually a story told. This is George Singh. He used to run, he doesn't know these giant faces out here. He used to run data at Lyft. And so he told this story about like one of the things they did at Lyft that I think is like a really compelling way to actually sort of describe what you can get out of this. And so Lyft, as I'm sure y'all can imagine, is a pretty complicated business. Like this is someone trying to basically describe how Lyft's business works. This is what it looks like. It's this very complicated, like multi-dimensional marketplace. There's lots of different things going on. They have to like grow in different markets. They have different products. It's a very like low margin business, so you have to figure out how to like run discounts and promotions and all those kinds of things. And it's like a pretty hard problem to solve. And so if you are thinking, for instance, of, all right, how do I decide as Lyft, how many riders do I try to recruit? Like how many drivers do I go out and try to recruit? What's the right number of people to promote to recruit as drivers? I don't know how much money to spend on that. Like it's a very hard thing to look at that previous slide and say, okay, yeah, we need to spend this amount of money to be able to make this make sense. Or if you like want to run promotions. Again, Lyft is like a low-margin business. Running promotions like this can be really expensive for no benefit. So you want to understand, like, to what point do we stop these promotions? How much do we pay? Is it $50? Is it 20? Is it, you know, one free ride? Like, all of these different decisions you can make that's very hard to actually figure out if you're looking just at that previous slide. And so what Lyft did was they basically said, okay, like, let's build a really simple model of this. And so that's what George said, is like we built this basic growth model. It was a thing just like in Excel that essentially described 3 or 4 characteristics of the business and said, these are how these things are related. Like when we have this many new drivers, we expect this many new rides. When we have this many rides, we expect this much revenue because the average revenue per ride. And it gave them a thing where they could tweak some knobs. And they could say, okay, like if we dial this up, then we would expect something else to happen on the other side. And so in doing that, they would actually like connect kind of business objectives together with the things that were actually happening on the ground. Again, this is kind of the operational part of it, is it's actually connecting with what's happening among people who are driving, what's happening in the real world that this data is trying to describe. And so the end result of that was that they actually could use that model to run the entire business. And so Lyft, for several years, basically ran their entire business on the back of this Excel model that over time built out in complexity, but was basically a very simple equation to describe this is how Lyft works. And so like the entire thing was driven by an understanding of how the business is actually operating in this kind of model. Now, some of you may be looking at this and be like, that sounds kind of familiar. That sounds like the operating models that finance teams use. Is this the same thing? Are you like saying just create stuff in Excel like finance teams? Are we all supposed to be like financial analysts now? The answer is like basically yes. Like these things are really valuable. Like businesses cannot function without this. The CEO is not going to fire the CFO and say get rid of this thing. Like this is the last thing to go out the door. And so if you want to be indispensable as a data team, it's building things like this that make you like that. And you don't have to build it strictly for finance. Like you can build these same models for marketing and for sales and for like product lifecycle and things like that. You can do the same thing, but there is something tremendously valuable in this. And there's kind of a lot of like disdain among data teams, like we don't want to report to the CFO, which I get. But they do stuff that is really valuable, and that's worth learning from. And so, to me, again, that is why this is kind of the holy grail of what we should be doing, is it's the foundation for the decisions that we need to make. It's saying this is how the business works. Everything else can spin off of that. The metrics that we look at, the decisions we try to make, the investments we make, all should be based on these kinds of models that describe the way the business works. I have no idea how much time I have. I'm going to wrap up with a couple more things, though. So I've got 2 more things. that I think are important notes to think about this as you think about sort of like building this kind of stuff. One is, it's like a team effort. This is not something that data teams can do on their own. That we cannot build a recruiting pipeline model without actually understanding what the recruiting team does. They are the folks who know what this should look like. They know what this really is. They know what they should expect in this. Like, we can't build that on our own. We have to go to them and say, OK, this is how we actually think we should model this process. Same thing with sales, same thing with marketing. Like, this is a very collaborative thing. That, like, data and BI is more and more collaborative. Part of that is we have to go and understand what it is that these functions are trying to do, and it's our job to say, hey, here's simple ways we can potentially model that and build that out. And Stephen Bailey yesterday gave a really great talk on this, on sort of like the models for these kinds of collaboration that I think tells this story really well about like what the role of a data team is in this function. And so the second thing I'll say, and last thing is, there's obviously like a lot of talk about metrics right now. And so when we think about metrics as a company, and we as like data teams think about, OK, what metrics do we want to create? What do we want to put on a dashboard? That kind of stuff. It's very tempting to draw like inspiration from just like lists of common metrics. That there's a lot of things like this of like, what are the best metrics for whatever? This one is like 16 KPIs that'll help your business succeed, or like these are the best SaaS metrics, all those sorts of things. There's these kind of best practices. That is very much to me putting the cart before the horse. That we shouldn't do this where we're trying to chase the metrics of other businesses. We should instead think about like what it is that Google does, or what it is that like Snowflake does. Basically, model the business that we want. Take the things that are like, this is what our business needs, and then build the metrics that match this. That decide the metrics based on how your business actually works. Don't decide the metrics and then sort of build your business around that. And so to like end this on the terrible but like necessary joke, to kind of build this backwards, where you're defining the metrics and then building your business around that, is a lot more than a flesh wound. It's like obligatory. OK, so that's what I got. I will stop. Thank you all.